I'm sure that after this show, there's going to be a lot of people doing shots.
In fact, they may pause the show, go out to the liquor store and get a bottle of Jägermeister and come back just so they can get through the rest of the show. In fact, I might have to do that.
Welcome to Damn It, Jim, the podcast. My name is Dana Smith, and my partner, returning from vacation, Dan Calzaretta. Good evening, Dan.
Dana, is that you?
Yeah, I know you don't recognize me. It's been so long since you've seen me.
I know. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. It seemed like a long time when I was gone, and now it seems like I didn't even leave. Now that I'm back,
not enough time, probably.
It was great though. We, my wife and I, were in French Polynesia. Had a fantastic time. Had never been any place like that before, so we really enjoyed it.
Well, I'm glad you did. I saw some pictures and it looked like a lot of fun. Glad you guys had so much fun, but I'm also glad you're back. We've been getting quite a lot of notice from some of our Facebook friends and also some comments that we've received through the email.
What I found funny is that we got more comments when we were off for 3 weeks playing repeat shows than we did when the shows were, weekly current.
I think it just goes to show that people didn't realize how much they missed, how much they needed the show in their lives.
I think you're right. I think that's exactly right. Yeah.
Makes a big difference. And you go back and revisit those shows, and actually I did. You could see the growth in our show, and you could see change in our listenership. What thing that stood out to me was I thought we have a lot of fun with this show.
Yeah, well, I know I have a lot of fun. And just listening, I also listened back. It is interesting how different they sound. Our ability to really dive into the show and talk about things that not only are kind of funny in some cases, but really, I think, important and sometimes even socially important topics.
Yeah, that's one of the things when we first started this, we didn't discuss that at all. It just kind of came about organically as we came upon things in the shows that we felt we needed to talk about.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, well, real quick, couple comments we did on Facebook that we got for a couple of our posts. Awesome was one of the comments I saw a few times on Facebook, and for things that we reposted or replayed. And thank you for replaying. This was one of the comments I got, and I was kind of surprised because you can go onto your podcast app and go play any of them, but maybe somebody just didn't realize what they'd been missing.
Or they didn't realize how an app works.
Yeah. Could be. I don't want to give anybody grief. I've struggled with some apps myself. So.
Oh yeah, me too. Yeah, I'm not throwing stones in glass houses. That's for sure.
Yeah. Got another comment from our friend in Austria. Said that they had a wide choice of podcasts to choose from, that they decided to go give us a listen, and they're still with us to this day. We're very fortunate for the people that are listening to us now.
Yeah, I agree. And let's not mess it up.
God knows we've tried. So.
Yeah, that's true. I also received a letter in the mail, like the real mail, where you have to put a stamp on the envelope.
No, I've not disclosed your home address. So,
are you sure you didn't put it on Facebook? But no, I got this letter from Iowa, from a listener in Iowa, and it's from a clipping from a small newspaper, and the title is James Tiberius Kirk and Riverside, Iowa. So I've been to Riverside several times. I guess I should disclose, for full transparency, that this listener happens to be my 91-year-old dad who does listen.
I'm surprised he has your address. So,
yeah. And that he took the time to clip this out and send it to me. It's like, God, this is what my son is doing now. What? Yeah. What happened?
All that money we spent on him. Yeah, that's
it. But anyway. So the newspaper article is about this town of Riverside, Iowa, and back in the 1970s, the town of Riverside was kind of down on its luck. It was very small, and there wasn't much going on there. A farming community, And someone on the city council got the idea of making Riverside, Iowa, as the official future birthplace of James Tiberius Kirk, because in Star Trek, the original series, it's part of the canon that Kirk comes from Iowa. He mentions it, that he comes from the state of Iowa. So the city council decides, well, or discusses, they didn't really know, could they do that legally? Could they just say that they're
adopt a fictional character?
Yeah, exactly right. There might be like some copyright thing. So in 1968, this is actually in 1968 when this idea came up, the city council sent a letter to Gene Roddenberry and said, hey, would you mind if we became the future birthplace of Captain James T. Kirk? And Roddenberry was like, yeah, it's fine. Okay. He's probably just shaking his head thinking, what's next? But so he said, sure. And the city council voted on it. They decided to put up a monument almost. It's a big stone that says Riverside, Iowa, the future birthplace of, James Tiberius Kirk. And then they started doing a festival every year. And I was able to actually go to the parade a couple of times. It was like any small town parade. Every fire truck, police truck, piece of farm equipment in a radius of probably 50 miles was in the parade. And then they had one float that had maybe 6 or 7 people on it that some were dressed like Star Trek, some were just alien looking. I don't know exactly what. But the final hurrah of the parade is that they towed behind a pickup truck a model of the USS Enterprise. And it was pretty big model, probably about the size of a Volkswagen or something like that. And they towed that behind and, threw out lots of candy to the kids and all that kind of thing. Anyway, so this article talks about how in the 2009 reboot that, should we even mention his name again?
J.J. Abrams?
Yeah, that guy who hasn't gotten back to us, by the way. J.J., look, we've repeated some of the shows, J.J. I know you're listening, so it's about time you get back to us. In the movie, Kirk is when I don't know if you recall the movie, but he gets in a bar fight and Pike sees him in the bar and he says, why don't you join Starfleet? And he's like, I'm not going to join Starfleet. And he decides to join Starfleet and he rides his motorcycle out and it says the Riverside Shipyards. Starfleet Riverside Shipyards, yep. When the movie came out, they premiered it in Riverside, Iowa for the town of Riverside. So they got to see the movie. If it wasn't first, it was, one of the first screenings of the film. If you haven't been to Riverside, Iowa, you're looking for a cool kind of off the beaten path vacation idea, screw French Polynesia. I mean, there's no Star Trek stuff going on there. Go to Riverside, Iowa. That's Riverside, Iowa, the future birthplace of James Tiberius Kirk.
Well, that's very cool. Iowa is also the birthplace of John Wayne.
Oh, yeah, that's right. In fact, when you're, I think, driving on Interstate 80, there's a sign that points you off in the direction of the town where he was born.
Yeah, it's just a small town. I think they still had the house that he was born in or grew up in. I never got off the road and went to see it. I was usually in a hurry to get where I was going. So,
well, everyone is. Unless you live in Iowa, you're hurrying just to get through.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, there goes our Iowa.
There goes Iowa.
All except for Riverside. So, yeah.
Let's see. So Nebraska, that's out, right?
Yeah.
Iowa's out. I think
what other state have we lambasted?
Well, Las Vegas. I don't know about the whole state of Nevada, but I know we kind of pissed off Las Vegas. So,
yeah.
Oh well. Sorry.
We're just working our way through the continental United States.
Yeah, that's right. There are some other famous fictional characters from Iowa. Probably the most famous, and I know you know this, Dana, is Radar O'Reilly, who is from Ottumwa,
Iowa.
Yeah, and there's some others as well that the article references, including
cool.
The Bionic Woman. She was from Van Horn, Iowa. And Miss Piggy from the Muppets was from Keystone, Iowa. A lot of Iowa characters in there.
Miss Piggy from Porkside, Iowa. Yeah.
Boy, pork is big. Pork is king in Iowa.
Yeah, or queen. Yeah. So.
Or queen. Goodbye, Iowa.
This is the 17th episode of the first season of Star Trek, the original series. Enterprise is en route to Beta 6 colony, and they are going through an area that they describe as a star desert. Now, I looked up a star desert, and I got hotel names. I got best place to see stars.
Uh-huh.
So, but because when I heard that, I thought that doesn't exist. And I was proven right. The only reference I could find to a star desert was in Memory Alpha, the Star Trek information page.
Yeah, it is a cool image, though, isn't it?
McCoy actually says, brings up images of desert sands and mirages. And there's a whole conversation that they have around that. And Spock corrects them and says the correct definition of a desert is a waterless, barren wasteland. Sensors pick up a planet. There's not supposed to be any planets in this sector. Sulu's at the helm, and he asks Sulu to make a course correction to stay on course for Beta 6 colony. All of a sudden, Sulu gets kind of a weird look on his face, and then he disappears.
Yeah, he stands up, and he looks like, oh my God, I got to get to the bathroom. Something's about to happen.
Yeah, he looks a little like dizzy or something.
Yeah, like he didn't take his dairy medicine, and he had a huge, ice cream cone, and then he just pops out of existence.
Yeah, and so then Kirk goes over to where Sulu was, and he gets a similar kind of look on his face, and then he disappears. At that point, Uhura, that's because Spock's studying space, doing what he does.
Yeah.
And Uhura says, Mr. Spock, they're gone. And he turns around and says, reverse all engines, or something to that effect. Spock and the crew say they've been spending 4 hours looking for the captain and Sulu. There's DeSalle, who is the navigator, and Jäger is on the bridge, along with McCoy, and they all are in favor of going down to the planet. But Jäger points out that the planet is volcanic in nature, and a person could not survive there very long. Then after some more searching, they find that there is a spot there on the planet that could sustain life, and they want to beam down to that spot. So Spock sends Jäger, DeSalle, and McCoy down to the planet, and they're down there with like little oxygen masks.
Yeah, I got to talk about that for a second, because Jäger says, just like you had pointed out, that you couldn't last long on that planet that's got these, volcanic gases and the temperature and all this stuff.
And he says something about like tornadic activity and stuff. So
Right.
It sounds like a bad place to be.
Yeah, you don't want to be there. And so they get on the transporter, and he's got on what looks like just a little mask that you would see someone wearing in an operating room, right? Just before they got put under for a surgery. It's just a little plastic mask hooked up to a tube, and then it runs to some little
box on their belt.
Yeah, a little box on their belt. How is that going to protect them from anything? That's the first point. The second thing is, this guy Jäger, every time they said his name, I was just thinking Jägermeister.
Yeah, I started doing Jägermeister shots about halfway through the show. So.
I was going to ask you. I've never done a Jägermeister shot. I've never had Jägermeister, at least that I can remember. But I wanted to ask you about, do you have any experiences with the Jägermeister that might be like going down to that planet? Tornadic winds, gaseous...
Volcanic eruptions.
Volcanic eruptions.
Yeah. It's. I remember in college when somebody was first talking about it, and everybody was swearing it was fermented deer blood. That's what people were all saying it was. And being the gullible college students that we were like, wow, fermented deer blood. And several of my friends wanted to try it, and I was against it. But then, as the night went on and we drank other stuff, suddenly fermented deer blood just sounded really good. So I'm not a big fan of Jägermeister.
I need to look this up, like this whole fermented deer blood, because I'm wondering now if this was a thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just put into Google Jägermeister deer blood. Okay, there are 277,000 results. I am not joking. All right.
Oh, I believe you.
And then the people People also ask, and you know how Google lists those, does Jägermeister have deer blood? Is there blood in Jägermeister? What is the deer in Jägermeister? And then and then from Jägermeister.com, they talk about the myth of deer blood. I guess because a deer is on the label or something.
Yeah, there's a buck on the label. Yeah.
Yeah, so apparently it was a thing, Dana. This whole deer blood. Hey, let's get it started again. Hey, Dana, did you know that Jägermeister is made out of deer blood?
Dan, I think I've heard that before. We should look into that.
Yeah, let's look into that. I think it's true. Just because it sounds like a cool story that it would be made out of deer blood.
Yeah, we could be like Mythbusters.
So we could be. This is another podcast we could do. all the myths around alcohol. Remember when we were growing up too? We would drink old style, and the can. Remember there was a drawing on the can. There was supposed to. Was there a frog on the can somewhere?
A frog. Supposedly there was two people having sex in the grass.
Right. With the frog. Yeah, let's do that as another podcast. I think that'll be fun. I'm serious. Folks, listen. We may have another podcast coming up, so we will want you to tune into that one too. We're experts actually in that area now that I think about it.
Yeah. Well, a little bit too much experts. Yeah.
Wow, the Jägermeister deer blood. I had never heard that, Dana. Never.
Really? Wow. That's I remember. I can almost see it at the bar I was at, and of course, in Wisconsin at the time, the age for alcohol and wine was 18, and
was that for beer and wine, but not for hard alcohol?
Yeah. What did I say? Alcohol and wine?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't matter. You're probably drunk now. You've probably been drinking deer blood all night.
Yeah. The age for beer and wine was 18, and the age for everything else was 19. I stood at a bar rail. Of course, I was 19, I think, at the time, but still, I remember a bartender telling us that it was made with deer blood, and I think one of the guys I was with said, "Yeah, it's fermented deer blood." But,
well, not to get off the whole Jägermeister, but every time they said that guy's name, I just thought, Jägermeister.
Yeah, and I don't even know if it was around in the 60s.
Well, let's see. I bet it will tell us when. That's what Google is for, Dana. I don't know how long it's been around. Let's see. I'd have to spend more time looking at that, and I'd rather talk about Star Trek. So
okay, so Jäger, DeSalle, and McCoy are on the planet walking around, and they find a castle, which seems kind of out of place there on this volcanic planet.
Wait, I got to say one more thing. Sorry about Jäger. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. So they get down to the planet, right? And Jäger checks his tricorder. Great idea before taking off the masks, right? They check tricorder, and he takes off his mask, and then he kind of sniffs a few times, and he looks at the other guys and kind of shakes his head like, yeah, it's okay. I just thought that was hilarious.
I'm still alive. It's okay.
Maybe the tricorder wasn't telling the truth. I'm going to take my mask off, and hey, if I die, I'm not going to die because I drink so much Jägermeister. It's got so much deer blood in it. It protects me from probably everything. But I just thought that was, again, just kind of funny. Like he just takes two big sniffs and like, yeah, okay, it's fine.
So they find this castle and they go inside, and right away it's, something's up. Because right inside the door is a stuffed saltsucker monster. And McCoy kind of like looks at it and then does a double take.
Yeah, he does.
It's great. And then they walk past like some bird type figure, and then they see kind of frozen Kirk and Sulu.
Yeah, now the bird, hold on a second. This bird, for those of our listeners who haven't watched the episode, or even if you have, go back, freeze on this bird. This bird looks like a meth addict's dream of Big Bird. I mean, or it looks like Big Bird on meth. I mean, it is so, I hope we don't lose our meth listeners, Dana, by me saying that. It was a scary looking thing, It was like Big Bird's alter ego.
Let me digress for a minute. There was when I was a kid and watched The Outer Limits.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you remember this or if anybody else will remember this. There was an episode, and I can't remember. I've looked for it. I've never seen it. Maybe it was a nightmare I had. I don't know. But this woman goes to the door, and there's like a giant raven type bird at the door. And I want to say like it was formerly her husband or something. I don't know. But it was, and I remember that giant bird scared the hell out of me. So they see these wax figures like of Kirk and Sulu, and McCoy uses the tricorder and says that they're basically wax figures.
Yeah.
And right at that moment, there's they hear a harpsichord playing, and they turn around and see this guy dressed in 17th century garb. He bids them welcome and talks about, Kirk and Sulu are great additions to the collection, and then he frees them. We learn that Trelane, General Trelane, as he introduces himself, has been looking back at Earth, he says, and that he's been studying them. And that's what he's made this whole castle for, to make them feel at home. And Kirk makes the comment that he's looked back 900 years at Earth, which would actually put his reference point about the 13th century.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense for 13th, 14th, somewhere. It just doesn't make any sense.
For being that the Enterprise was in the 23rd century.
Yeah, and he talks about France and Napoleon and the duel of Alexander Hamilton, and so it doesn't really make any
there's
sense.
A lot of stuff in there. And then, where did the salt creature come from?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even think about that. That's a good point. Why would he have the salt creature there even?
I don't remember that in my history books. I don't remember, Alexander Hamilton and dealing with the salt creature, that type of thing.
That's because, Dana, there are things they don't want you to know, and they hide it. I was the teacher. I know this. I've seen the real history of things. And they scrub all that out of there because they don't want to freak people out.
And that's what the pyramid's for on the dollar bill, so that that's where they hide everything is in the pyramid. Yeah. So. Yeah,
that's the whole. Dare I say the word Illuminati? Can I say that? Or
I thought you were going to say Masonic. So.
Masonic. Same. I think it's
Masonic, Illuminati. Yeah.
Same thing, isn't it? I mean.
Yeah, pretty much.
As we were prepping for the show, I came across an article that
nobody's going to believe that we prep for this
show. We do. I mean, we both watch the episode. We take notes.
Everybody's going to think we prepped for Jägermeister and Outer Limits.
Well, we may have been drinking fermented deer's blood while watching the episode, and taking notes. But I came across this article that talked about the coat that he's wearing. And the coat, normally they have in-house costume makers. The coat, this was not made in-house. They went to a costume rental company. And as it turns out, the same coat was used in an episode of Gilligan's Island, worn by Mr. Howell, and used in an episode of The Monkees, worn by Michael Nesmith. And they have pictures in this article that shows these characters from the other shows wearing the same coat.
So this Trelane character talks a lot about war, and he seems fascinated by campaigns and battles and just kind of like all just zealous about killing. And all the while, he kind of talks and treats the crew like they're toys. They're just like objects he's playing with.
Well, and he remarks on the ancestry of DeSalle, and says something about him being French, and maybe even speaks a little French to him. And DeSalle says, yes, my ancestors were French. And then he says something to Jäger and speaks to him in German. And I did look up the translation, by the way. What he does say is Jägermeister is made of deer's blood.
And then he goes on to explain how he created this whole environment. And he says, they've perfected a system where matter can be transferred to energy and back again. He says they can alter shapes at will. And Kirk says they're leaving, and Trelane says he needs another example of his authority. And all of a sudden, Kirk is on the outside of the castle and the bad part of the planet where you need a oxygen mask type thing, gasping for air and falls down to his knees. And
there was smoke swirling throughout the scene. Yeah,
and he's gasping for air. Mm-hmm. And then Trelane brings him back, and he says, either you behave or you'll make me very, very angry. Again, I remember thinking, who talks like that? You behave or you'll make me very, very angry. It's like a child's threat because they have nothing else.
What I was reminded of was Charlie X during this part. It was almost like the idea got recycled a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. I had the same kind of thought. We go back to the Enterprise, and Spock is saying that they've made 14 orbits around the planet without any communication from the team. Spock says there is one small part of the surface that could sustain life. Scotty suggests that, or agrees with Spock, that they just beam up any life forms that are there. And they say it's risky, but they're going to attempt it. Back in Trelane's quarters, McCoy says he's scanned Trelane and he is not a normal life form. And he says the scans doesn't show anything that he exists at all. Jäger comes up and says that the fireplace is burning bright, but it's not giving off any heat. So Kirk at this point says that their host does make mistakes, and they thought that they could play upon that. Kirk pleads with Trelane to let him go, and Trelane is very insistent that they stay. And he says he was quite bored before they showed up. Kirk says, we have 400 crew members, men and women, on the ship. And suddenly Trelane gets kind of excited.
Oh, yeah. He gets excited, Dana. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. He gets...
He says, women, you have women on board. And he says something about they all must be beautiful and well-dressed or something like that. He says he'll bring the women down to the planet. And Kirk stops him and says, this game has gone on long enough. And then just then, McCoy's communicator beeps and says it's the transporter signal. And Trelane asks, what is it? And Kirk walks over to everybody else, and they all get beamed off of Trelane's castle. Trelane just kind of stands there complaining that they've abandoned him. So on the ship, Spock meets the party at the transporter, and Kirk gives the order to warp out of the area at maximum speed. And on the bridge, there's a new young blonde yeoman, and then the young yeoman looks up and says, look, and everyone turns to see Trelane is standing on the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Kirk tells him to get off the ship, and Trelane says no. Then suddenly, they're all back at the castle. Trelane warns the crew not to test him again. And then, of course, he asks to be introduced to the women.
So Uhura got beamed down as well as the yeoman.
Yeah, it's Yeoman Ross. And he sees Uhura, and he says, she's a Nubian prize. And he takes her hand and kisses her hand. And then he kind of glances at Kirk and says, taken during one of your raids of conquest, no doubt. Trelane says she has the same coloring and the eyes as the Queen of Sheba. And then he's introduced to Yeoman Ross, and he says, is this the face that launched 1,000 ships? And he goes to kiss her, and Kirk stops him and pulls him away, and then he introduces him to Spock again. And he says, this is my science officer, Spock. Trelane says, you object to me. And Spock says, I object to you. I object to intellect without discipline. I object to power without constructive purpose, which is my favorite line from the show.
Yeah, it's a great line. It is a great line.
Trelane says, you have one redeeming quality, and that is that you're ill-mannered.
which is like totally opposite of Spock in every regard.
And then he tells Uhura to play the harpsichord, and he goes to take Yeoman Ross for a dance, and Uhura's like, I don't play the harpsichord. And he goes, well, of course you do. And suddenly she's playing the harpsichord.
Yeah.
This is where McCoy comes up and tells Kirk that the food and drink have no taste. And Spock is not surprised. He says he knows all of your forms, but none of your substances. Kirk says he's fallible and something is helping him, a machine or a device. So Trelane gives Ross a new dress. Looks like she came out of Marie Antoinette's ball. Kirk pulls Ross away and Trelane, and then he challenges him to a duel.
Yeah, in fact, Kirk is acting like Ross is his property and Trelane needs to keep his hands off of her. And it's all a ruse. I mean, he doesn't, I don't think he means any of it, although his relationship with the various yeomen throughout the series is always implied that there's something going on. But in this case, he's just trying to kind of get Trelane to take the bait, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And he knows because of the way Trelane's acting that if he challenges him to a duel, Trelane will accept. Trelane gets all excited and he goes and gets dueling pistols. And then he points one of the ones at Kirk's face and he says, I never miss.
And doesn't he mention that these were similar to the pistols that Alexander Hamilton used in his duel?
Yeah, with Burr.
With Burr, yeah. Who was vice president at the time, if you think about it. How bizarre, And then he kills Alexander Hamilton, who's, I think Secretary of the Treasury at the time.
one that basically started the Treasury.
Yeah, he did. That's right. Yeah. So this is a history. We should do a history podcast, Dana.
I'm just going to quit my day job. So
Can you imagine? Some kid goes to school. Yeah, I heard on this podcast. And the teacher would be like, no. Who are these people again? One of them says he's a teacher. Mm-mm. And the other guy says that Jägermeister is made of blood.
So Trelane says he gets the first shot. It's his game, his rules. And then he points a gun at Spock and basically is saying, if you don't agree to my rules, I'm going to kill Spock.
Yeah.
So Kirk agrees. Then Trelane aims at Kirk, then suddenly points the gun upward and fires. So then Trelane kind of like opens himself up and says, my fate is in your hands, and being very noble and kind of playful at the same time. And Kirk takes aim, and then he shoots the mirror. And Trelane is got this mirror that he's always looking into next to the harpsichord. And the mirror crashes, and suddenly this part of the show loses me because it goes boing, ching, ding. It's like cartoonish.
Yeah, I hated this part. I hated this part of the show.
And of course, Trelane throws a fit. He walks towards the mirror and says, I will, you've ruined everything, and I will kill all of you. And he says, go back to your ship. You will feel my wrath. You're all dead men, especially you, Captain. And then he goes towards the mirror and just disappears. Kirk calls the ship and says to beam everyone up. And so they get beamed up. Then suddenly the planet's in front of them again, and they're like on a crash course for it. So yeah, they keep making basically kind of wild maneuvers to try to avoid crashing into the planet. Finally, they come to a stop, and Kirk says he's going to beam down.
Yeah, he's just like had it. He's like, enough of this crap. Stop the ship. I'm going down there.
Yeah, I'm going to have it out with Trelane. And then he tells Spock, if I'm not back in an hour, break free, get the hell out of here, basically. Kirk goes to get on the turbo lift. Suddenly he's back back with Trelane, and they're in a court setting, and Trelane is wearing the black robe and the white wig from the old days,
like an old English court. Well, they still wear those in English courts.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
And he says the prisoner may approach the bench, and we see a noose in shadow kind of behind Kirk. Which was kind of a neat way to set that up. He says his instrumentality is now unbreakable, so that there can be no foul play by Kirk.
He can't shoot the mirror or anything like that.
Yeah. So he starts to read off the charges against Kirk, and Kirk's interrupting him, saying he's tired of the games. He wants his ship and crew set free. And Trelane says, you agree to the charges? And Kirk says, yes, anything to allow my ship to continue its journey. And he says, the people are innocent. They have done nothing, no harm, nothing wrong. And they are living beings, not playthings. Trelane says Kirk is guilty and will hang by the neck until he is dead, dead, dead. Trelane is saying he didn't think it was possible, but he was experiencing anger and rage. And he says that the experiment has been successful. The noose comes closer to Kirk as Trelane is grabbing a hangman's black mask. Kirk takes a different approach with Trelane and says that he's missed his opportunity, that, there's no sport in what he's proposing. This kind of confuses Trelane and intrigues him at the same time.
Yeah, and Kirk knows this, right? Kirk knows that if he can hook Trelane with some type of battle in some way, that maybe Kirk can get out of this.
And Trelane proposes a hunt where he hunts Kirk. I don't know if you ever read the story, The Most Dangerous Game. That's what came to mind for me.
Yeah.
Or seeing the movie.
Yeah, for me too. Exactly.
And Kirk says, well, what's in it for me? He says, you must release my ship and let it go on its journey. And Trelane is upset. Always the ship. Always you're just so worried about the ship. Finally, Trelane accepts Kirk's terms. Next thing we see is Kirk is outside of the castle. Suddenly, Trelane appears with a sword and starts trying to kill Kirk. Kirk dives out of the way of one of the lunges. It's so bad. It's like a slow motion roll, in which time Trelane could have stabbed him about 50 times.
These aren't stunt actors in this scene.
No.
It's Trelane, William Campbell, and it's William Shatner doing these stunts. And maybe that's why they had to do it so slowly, just because they're not, that's not their thing. They're not trained at that type of thing.
Kirk gets up and he runs away. Trelane keeps after him. Every time Kirk gets a chance, he tries to call the ship. Trelane keeps chasing him. At one point, Kirk comes around when Trelane's not looking and he knocks a sword out of his hand, but then Trelane just makes a new sword appear. Kirk runs back towards the castle and tries to get in the castle, but the door's locked. And then a cage appears on one side, and he goes turn the other way, and another cage appears, and Trelane's basically got him cornered. And comes up, and again, Kirk just says, when Trelane's like, I've won, and he's, all giddy. Kirk says, no, you haven't. You haven't won anything. He goes, there's no battle. And he says, you've tricked me, and all this. And Trelane is again upset, and then he has a fit, and Kirk actually slaps him on the face to try to knock him out of it. That just infuriates Trelane more, and he's going to kill Kirk. There's just no doubt at this point. And then all of a sudden these two green globs of light appear and call to Trelane. He runs away from Kirk. He complains that they're ruining his fun. There's a male voice and a female voice, so you get the feeling that they're parental figures, and they say it's time for him to come in.
Yeah. Oh God, this part, Dana. And then he starts talking like a little kid.
Yeah.
The mannerisms and the kind of the inflection, and it just, that bugged me so much.
He says, I won't listen to you. Things like that. They say when you grow up, you'll understand. He fades and disappears. The green glowing gobs apologize to Kirk and say they'll let him get back to his ship. Kirk, he asks who they are, who Trelane was, but he doesn't get an answer.
They just leave.
And next thing we see is he's back on the bridge.
I didn't like this part, Dana. I did not like the end of the show.
On the bridge, they're at warp factor 4. Spock comes up to Kirk and asks, for the record, how do we classify Trelane? Kirk says, god of war, a child, a very naughty child. And then he kind of looks at Spock and says, he was, a naughty boy. He probably did the same things you did as a little boy. And Spock kind of raises an eyebrow and he says, dipping girls' pigtails in ink bottles, stealing apples from a neighbor's tree. And then he kind of realizes what he's saying and he apologizes to Spock. And Spock walks away looking slightly perplexed, and at one moment looks like he's going to turn around and say something, then just kind of shakes his head and moves on.
Right. What I found interesting here, Dana, is the examples that Kirk used. The dipping the...
Very old.
Super old. I only know them because I've seen other references in movies or something,
Yeah, dipping girls' pigtails in ink bottles. I mean, we're not young, Dan, but I never used an ink bottle in my life. I know what one is, but I never used one. I think those went out in the 40s.
Yeah, it was odd.
So, Dan, did you have favorite parts of this episode? I know that there are some things you weren't as crazy about, but we'll get to those in a second. What are some of the best parts?
Yeah, one of the best parts was the actor William Campbell, who played Trelane. I thought he was totally believable as that character, and the way that he could switch from being funny and charming to menacing was really convincing to me. So for the most part, I love the character, but I really love the actor. How about for you? What was the best part for you?
It's kind of funny, but Scotty and Sulu were fairly involved, especially Sulu's in a lot of the scenes. There was more of the whole cast. Another thing I thought was good. There was some moments in it was kind of a fun episode, but there's a real undertone in this about war and the kind of brutality of war. And I was reading that the writer of the episode wanted to make this as an anti-war statement, but I think that some of those tones still exist in there, and I thought it was good.
Well, I think all art, and we can consider this art, is a product of the time in which it's made. And Vietnam War was going on in the 1960s. It hadn't quite gotten to the crescendo of 1968 yet, where there's massive protests in the street, but we're getting there. And so, of course, that's going to be reflected in the episode.
What about some of the worst parts for you?
It was the stupid freaking sound effects when Kirk shoots the mirror. That was horrible. Bad choice by the sound design person. Do you have another worst part?
We talked about it a little bit. The Trelane is a lot like Charlie X.
So, Dana, let's go to the counts. How many dead crewmen do we have this week, Dana?
Unfortunately, none, Dan.
Yeah, once again. Oh, God. This is really horrible. So we're...
I really thought Jäger might be... Jäger or DeSalle might end up a dead crewman.
So no one... Again this week, Dana, we're stuck at 23.5. What about the shirtless Kirk, rip shirt Kirk count?
Again, I thought we had a chance for a rip shirt, a cut shirt, something with Trelane and Kirk's final battle, but wasn't to be.
8. We're stuck at 8 on that one. The he's dead count?
Still 8 out of 17 episodes.
Well, yeah. So that's a half of a shirt, about half a shirt every episode. If we're doing the math right. I think we are. What about the he's dead count?
There was none.
Yeah, because no one died. So those two are kind of related. The he's dead and the how many crewmen died.
Yeah, maybe Coy could have said it about the salt sucker. That's
or the meth-addled Big Bird. Okay, so we're stuck at 3. Only 3. And then I'm a doctor, not a fill in the blank.
Yep, not even a chance there. Didn't see it once.
0, so we're stuck at 1. How about a couple of things from history?
Well, this episode aired on January 12th, 1967. There was a Dr. James Bedford. He became the first person to be cryogenically preserved with the intent of future resuscitation. And his remains are still preserved at the Alcor Life Extension Foundation.
Yeah, I've got the feeling that guy looks like some hamburger that I left in the freezer for about a year and forgot it was down there. And you know how it gets all like crystallized and stuff? That guy's not coming back. Also, on that date, Muhammad Ali was refused exemption from the draft board. So they were telling him that he could be drafted. Because he declared himself a conscientious objector and was... For religious reasons. Yep, for religious reasons, and opposed the war. And some people made fun of him and said, well, you're a boxer. Obviously, you don't oppose fighting. They couldn't see the difference there, apparently. But yeah, I mean, that was a pretty important step in the anti-war movement. And at this point, on January 12th, I'm a Believer by the Monkees was the #1 song on the Billboard charts. And again, the tie-in there is that in the show The Monkees, Michael Nesmith wore the same jacket that Trelane wears in this episode. What's the episode we got for next week, Dana? It's the arena, the first time we see the Gorn. Yeah, it's going to be a really, really good one. All right, Dana. So I've had a great time this week. It's good to be back, and it's good to be doing these episodes again. Yeah, I miss sitting down with you and going over these episodes. All right, Dana. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Okay. As always, live long and prosper.
Thanks once again for listening to Damn It Jim, the podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Please send us an email at dammitjimpodcast@gmail.com or join the discussion on Facebook or Twitter. As mentioned in the podcast, you might love to visit the future birthplace of Captain James Tiberius Kirk in Riverside, Iowa. You can find a link to that community in the show description. For Dan and Dana, have a great weekend, and as always, live long and prosper.